Good morning. We are going to get started this morning, and we have a welcome by Clerk Russell.
Thank you, Marleni. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. It's 8 o'clock. Good morning. And welcome to So just a little fun fact about us. Orange County used to be called Mosquito County. Yes. And if you actually used to live here, or if you're familiar with it, we probably still should call ourselves that because we have man-eating mosquitoes depending on where you live in our county. But welcome to Orange County. I know many of you come here often because pre-pandemic, this was usually a very popular meeting spot for CCOC as well as FCCC. So welcome to our budget work session. I want to, on behalf of Clerk Peacock, who could not be with us for this session, I want to welcome you on behalf of the council. Thank you to John Dew and his staff, Griffin, Marleni, John. And I do, before we get started, you want to introduce our new member? Yeah. Okay. Raul, can you, Raphael, I'm sorry. Where is Raphael? Oh, everyone welcome Raphael to the team. So go ahead, introduce yourself, Raphael, since you have a microphone.
Morning, guys. How you doing? My name is Raphael Lee. Chief staff at the CCOC. We working on the budget.
Thank you, thank you. So I just want to thank you all again for coming to attend the budget session right before the holidays. But we're going to get started because we have a full agenda, and I do want to in advance thank all of our clerk staff who are here to participate on this agenda. Thank you for giving your time to share your experience, what's happening in your county, so that all of us can be successful, because we want to have a very smooth and efficient budget year this year. So with that, I'm going to get started and call up Marleni, who's going to give us a show flow for today. And thank you all again for coming.
Okay, so I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of how today is going to work. There's a little gap here, it falls off. The first session is with Griffin. He's going to go over the pandemic recovery funding reporting form and then the jury reimbursement form. He also has some other issues that he can discuss if you've got questions. What we are going to do is, if you have questions as we go through it, just raise your hand, get our attention, or get Raphael's attention. He will have a microphone so you can ask the question. And we ask that you utilize the microphone for your questions so that everything is being recorded today, and we want to make sure we've got a good, clean recording. So, you go back to your offices and you're like, wait, I think that they said something about, you will be able to go back and look at the video recordings and have that available to you. After we get done with today, the recordings, it'll take a little bit for us to get them, but they will be posted on the CCOC website as well as through Clerk. And then our presentations of today, after we conclude today, they will also be available in Clerk and on the CCOC website. So we're putting them in multiple places for you. But the reporting forms will only be on the CCOC website. Then the second session will be me discussing the revenue projection form and some revenue projection tools. We also have Susan Sullivan from Citrus County going to give a presentation. And then the third session for today will be going over the operational budget and the certification letter. We don't have any major changes, but there are a couple little things that we want to make sure that we point out as we go through the instructions. And then you'll notice that you have a 2-hour gap for your lunch break. That is to give you time to check back in with your offices. If you want to walk over to a Universal Walk to get lunch, that will give you time to walk over, sit down, have a meal, walk back, catch your breath, because it is a little bit of a walk, but a good and healthy one. There's also dining options here in the hotel if you don't want to leave, or as someone pointed out yesterday, they could have an hour lunch and an hour nap and be right back. So On the back of your agenda, I hope you grabbed one coming in, is all of the dining options. So they're the on location, walk nearby, and drive nearby options. And then this afternoon, we'll come back and we're going to have a session that I'm actually the most excited for is our calculating court and non-court allocations. As many of you know, we are audited every year by DFS. And so as they go through your counties, it's 3 to 5 years on your end, but we get those reports as they come in. And one of the most commonly found audit findings was not having valid proof for your court and non-court allocations. And so we've had a version from Palm Beach that they developed that was long approved by DFS. But then we had more recently a calculation version by Pasco County that was just approved by DFS as a justified method for calculating your court and non-court allocations. So we're going to see some examples of those given by Shannon Ramsey Chessman from Palm Beach County and Heather Grimes from Pasco County. So those will be hopefully very enlightening and useful for you. And then last, at 3:30 today, we'll have CCOC staff available for one-on-one assistance if you have other questions that we haven't covered today. So that is an outline of our day today, and Griffin is up next.
All right, good morning. Set a few feet. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy days to join us. Can you still hear me if it's this far down? Sorry, a little better. Good morning, I'm Griffin Kolchakian. I'm the Budget and Communications Director at the CCOC. Been here about 6 months, so be nice with your questions. This is good, it's fine. It's on.
Okay.
It's on it. So this morning, I'm going to do a brief overview of both the Clerk's Pandemic Recovery Plan, as well as the new and improved Jury Reimbursement Plan. And as a reminder, both of those funding sources are in addition to and above our clerk's budget that's approved by the Budget Committee and the Executive Council. And both of those are state appropriated dollars from the legislature, and they are on the state fiscal year as opposed to the county fiscal year. So 3 months earlier. We get a lot of questions on if we can ever shift that to the county fiscal year, which is a great question. That would be a dream scenario, but unfortunately, since it is state appropriated dollars that expire at the end of June, they will be on the state fiscal year. So tracked a little differently, but let's get started. We'll start with the Pandemic Recovery Plan. So earlier this year during the legislative session, the legislature appropriated the clerk $6.25 million statewide of non-recurring general revenue. So again, that is appropriate on a state fiscal year. So it became effective July 1st of this year, and it will expire after its 12-month period next June on the 2022. It is distributed and released quarterly, so we can't spend more than our quarterly release each time. So we get 25%, 25%, 25%. And that's for both of those funding sources. So for the Pandemic Recovery Plan, the purpose of it is to address the backlog of cases that we had after facing the COVID-19 pandemic. And as a note, we will be requesting year 2 of this funding, $6.25 million, the same amount that we got this year for next year. So Jason and the legislative team will hopefully bring home another $6.25 million. So this funding was in conjunction with our partners at the courts. They got $9.25 million to go along with our $6.25 million to help address these cases. Same deal, they got non-recurring one-time general revenue. And I do believe that they are asking for the same amount this year. I would defer to Jason on that. So how did we come up with the allocation by county for this funding? We worked with our partners over at the courts, specifically the TCBC, Trial Courts Budget Commission. So we worked with them to see how they were going to allocate their funding and where they thought the most cases were from the backlog, as kind of a weighted cases, multi-year distribution. So we just piggybacked with that, used that methodology, applied it to our funding source, and that's how we came up with the quarterly distribution amount by county. And as always, our forms and memos, anything related to this and anything else we do is always available at the CCOC website there in red. Okay, so this is important. That's why it's in size 95 font. Please ensure that 100% of these allocated dollars for your county are fully expended by June 30th, 2022. We can't carry any of this forward. It's just one-time non-recurring funding. So again, please just make sure that we fully expend this generous funding after the 12-month period. And as a reminder, we can't expend more than 50% right now. So we're currently in the second quarter of the state fiscal year. So we can't spend over 50% to date, but please make sure we've spent that 50% by the end of December 31st. So we've got a lot of good questions on what can we use these funds for? What can we use them on? So the main thing that people are using them for are hiring temporary staff to work these cases, using them for overtime hours related to working cases, attending additional court hearings, salary dollars of staff that are working cases. So if you don't have temporary staff, if you don't have any overtime hours, if you're a small shop, any of your employees that are addressing cases, you can apply this to their salary dollars first, use that, and then use your CCOC budget for the remainder. And anything else specifically related to working these cases, that's what this can be used for. So there are two forms related to tracking this. The first one is the signed certification letter through the JAC. It's similar to all the other certification letters that we do. But again, this form is quarterly and it's due at the beginning of each quarter and submitted to our reports email there in red. The certification letter for quarter 3 will be due December 20th. So that's coming up. That's a little different than what we did for quarter 1 and quarter 2. But this way it's before the quarter 3 starts on January 1st. That way it gives us a week and a half to hopefully get these approved by the JAC. And that way we can have those dollars available as soon as the quarter starts to maximize the amount of time that everyone has. The second sheet is the expenditures tracking spreadsheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And it's filled out at the end of each quarter and submitted to the same reports email by the 20th of the following month, which is when all of our reports are due. I'm sure as everyone knows that. And as a reminder, the expenditure spreadsheet for the second quarter will be due January 20th. There's one issue I wanted to bring your attention to, and it had to do with the state fiscal year versus the county fiscal year and tracking quarter 1 of the state fiscal year, which is the 4th quarter of the county fiscal year. We got a lot of feedback from a lot of you guys and a lot of different counties that they did not want to track this funding in 2 different county fiscal years, which is completely understandable. So what 48 counties did was defer their quarter 1 funding to the second quarter. And that way you don't have to track anything for the first quarter, but with the understanding that in the second quarter that we're currently in, that you would expend quarter 1 plus quarter 2, so 50% by December 31st. So there again, an important note, please make sure you've expended 50% by December 31st and 100% by June 30th. There will be a test at the end of my presentation. And again, you cannot expend over the released amount. We had a few counties in the first quarter expend more than 25%. So I will be reaching out if that was the case. So again, for the quarter that we're in, please ensure that of your county's allocation that 50% is expended. 50%. All right. Before we get into jury funding, I'm going to pull up the, does anyone have any questions before I pull up the form? Oh, can we bring you a mic? Sorry. 50%. Test. You're saying like total before the actual cases versus the work that we did to get down to that number? No, it was mainly based on, that's a great question. It was mainly based on work that was done prior and then kind of what the courts, where they thought a majority of it would be. And I think the estimate they used at the time was 1.2 million cases that were backlogged. But again, I don't think there was an actual list of where those cases were by county. But that would be great, but that'd be a lot of tracking and I just don't think they were able to capture that. But great question, thank you. Any other questions? All right. So this is the certification letter. Again, it looks like the rest of our certification letters that we do. Pretty simple. It's one page. You just fill out the appropriate quarter, date it, and then the clerk signs it, and then you send it into our reports email. For the tracking spreadsheet, this is probably our most complicated form that we have. But like the rest of our forms, anything in green is what needs to be filled out, and in gray is hard-coded and locked and automatically calculates it. So you pick a county, and we will randomly pick DeSoto. Is anyone from DeSoto here? They can't defend themselves. All right, so you just select your county from the drop-down box. You type in your full name. I won't spare you with spelling my last name. And then you fill in your email. And so DeSoto deferred their Q1 expenditures because they only want to track it in one fiscal year. So they didn't need to send anything for the first quarter, but they fill it out for when they send it in the second quarter. So they had no personnel and no operating. And again, we gave two different levels of tracking, but we rolled it up for ease. But most of the funding, 99.9%, will be personnel, but we wanted to give you an option if you did have any operating expenses related to working these cases, so you could break that out. We haven't heard of any that I'm aware of, but if you have any, that gives you that ability to break it out from personnel. But for this scenario, we will assume that DeSoto had nothing. They deferred their Q1. So then now at the end, by January 20th, when they send in their Q2 form, they hired temporary staff and they spent 50% of their funding. We'll get there. So that their total allocation was $7,849. So they spent 50% on their temporary staff. Right there, they did not spend anything in operating. So that is the form that they would send in to us on January 20th. So then at the end of Q3, state fiscal year Q3, in April, by April 20th, they spent the 25% that they got allocated for the third quarter on temporary staff. They didn't spend anything on operating. So that's what they would send in Q3. And then by June 30th, so 20 days after that, so July 20th, they have spent 100% of their total funding. So there it goes. It calculates the 7,849 was their total allocation for the year. They've spent everything, and they had zero for operating. And this is the final form that they would send in by July 20th for the year. And then again, hopefully we'll be able to fill this form out again next state fiscal year if we were able to get the 6.25 million again. Is there any question on this form? Yes, sir. Hello. That's a great question. Yes, it will likely be audited by DFS and then also JAC, since the state appropriation is through JAC. They will likely ask us for documentation proving that we spent 100% of our funding and what we spent it on. And we did approve these forms through the JAC that they were appropriate to track. But we have an aggregate form that we will compile all of these forms in to see, personnel operating by quarter, and we'll have that tracking. So if anything does come up, any audits, we will have that tracking. So great question. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. December 31st, 50%. All right, we'll get there. They have coffee in the back. All right, on to jury funding. So again, jury funding appropriated state dollars on the state fiscal year. So earlier this year, during legislative session, the legislature changed our jury process to a jury management funding process to a reimbursement model via Senate Bill 838. So that's great news. And it replaced our current advanced and reconciliation process. And again, it started July 1st of this year for this state fiscal year. This allowed us to eliminate a quarterly form. So 4 forms a year. We were able to condense the estimate form, the actuals form into one jury management reimbursement form. So that's great news. One less form, 100%. So for the budget side of jury for state fiscal year 21-22, the legislature appropriated us our $11.7 million of recurring funding. Did not get cut, which is great news. As well as in the back of the bill, they appropriated us $2.4 million of carry forward unexpended funds from the previous year. So funds that we were not able to utilize during the pandemic because of the slowdown, we were able to now bring those forward for this 1 year and add that to the $11.7 million that we have available for jury. And as a note, we are requesting this again for next year. So hopefully we get this language carried forward. And that way, anything that we don't spend this year, we will have available for next year as well. So that's great news. That brings our total jury budget for this year to $14.1 million. So that's $3.5 million that we have to spend quarterly. Again, we can't spend more than that, but that's a very generous amount per quarter this year. So just as a frame of reference, almost everyone has submitted their Q1 actuals, and it totaled just about 3.2. So under that 3.5, but which we'll get to later in our form, there was a lot of rollover dollars that we had, that you guys had. And so that brought that number down to 1.8 because we offset it with money that we had in individual clerks' offices. So again, there are 2 forms instead of 3 now related to jury. We have the signed certification letter, which is very similar to our pandemic recovery. And again, that is due at the beginning of each quarter and submitted to the reports email there in red. The certification letter for Q2 will be due January 10th. So this is our only forms that are due not on the 20th. And the thought process behind having them due on the 10th instead of the 20th is that gives us an extra week and a half to hopefully get this funding approved through the JAC and then through DFS, and hopefully get the funds to the counties a week and a half earlier. So that was the thought process behind it, moving up to the 10th. We got a lot of good feedback since this is our first go through. After Q1, state fiscal year Q1, that's when y'all were closing out your books. And so there was a lot of time crunch and a lot of things that needed to be changed. So, I think that's something we'll look at next year of maybe for the first quarter, not having it due on the 10th. But then for the rest of the time, we've heard feedback that that's very easily accomplished on the 10th. So we'll take care of that next year. The second form is the jury management reimbursement form. And again, it's filled out and submitted at the end of each quarter with the actuals that you spent, and it goes to the reports email there by the 10th of the following month. So the reimbursement form will be due the same time as the certification letter, January 10th. Huge thank you to Clerk Vic and her staff for helping us adapt the actuals form into this jury management reimbursement form and get that up and running in time for the first quarter, we would not have been able to accomplish that without her and her team. So huge thank you. And again, all the applicable forms, memos, information is available on our CCOC website at the link there in red. Any questions on jury before I pull up the form? Absolutely. Yep, estimate form and the actuals form, both those forms are gone, and now we just have the jury management reimbursement. So no more, you don't have to estimate anything. It is just strictly a reimbursement model. So I'll just pull up the certification form. So again, very similar to the pandemic recovery. You check the appropriate quarter, date it, clerk signs it, and then you send it in to our reports email. And then here is the new jury management reimbursement form, which again, very similar to the actuals, but we made some slight modifications to hopefully make it easier and more streamlined. So today we will be Alachua, since it's the first alphabetically. You just type in your contact's name, your email, reporting quarter. We'll retry. So we will do it for the first state quarter, July through September. And this is the first version that we're going to send in. So we select version 1. Now, if you'll notice, when we selected Alachua from the dropdown over here in J5, it brings up the budget authority that they have allocated for Alachua for the year. Since this isn't really necessary moving forward, but it is a good guideline. It's based on 3 years of actuals. So it just kind of gives each county a guideline of what you've spent in the past and where you would like to be for this fiscal year. So before we start, since it is before the first quarter that you just completed, we will come down to a new addition to the form this year, which is F40. And this is where, when I mentioned we had like 1.6 million aggregate that we had on the books. So this is where, and I think I've talked to a lot of you on this, but any cash that we had on hand coming into this fiscal year, so what you had on hand June 30th, this is where it would go. And you would say, okay, let's say we had $5,000 left over from the previous year. And where this could come from is based on our previous model where it was your estimate and then actuals came back through later through a disbursement with JAC. There was a lot of, it was off slightly or sometimes by a lot. So some examples we saw for this 5,000, for example, let's say last state fiscal year when we were on the estimate actuals process, let's say you estimated to spend 100,000 for the year, but we only actually spent 95,000. So JAC dispersed us 100,000. We only spent 95,000. So we have 5,000 still on the books to carry forward. So that's likely where this number came from. Now, there are some counties that had funds going back all the way to fiscal year 16-17 when this appropriation was first appropriated to the clerks. But hopefully this was a one-time cleanup, cleanup to get us back to net zero coming into this fiscal year, into this new reimbursement process. So there were even some counties that had deficits here. So you were able to put a negative into this field. If for some reason you had $100,000 was dispersed and you spent $105,000, well, now we're owed $5,000 from the JAC, and this is where you'd put negative 5,000. And it does calculate over here in column K, but we'll get to that in a second. So coming back up to the top. So column G is for the state fiscal year quarter 1, and that's where all of our actual expenditures that we expended from July through September, we will put in here. So again, no more estimating. It's just truly what your jury expenses were. So in this scenario, let's say for personnel costs, for anyone that worked related to jury, let's say we had $30,000. Then for operational costs, still broken out in a couple different silos. So postage, we had $500. Printing, we had $500 as well. And then supplies, consistent, we had $500. And then let's say we had $500 of other. Now, if you'll notice next to the other, it says include specific description on row 48. So if we have anything in any of the three other categories, we scroll down to 48 where we can enter the description, and we stay in column G. And then we identify that it was operational where we had the other. And then it's for, let's say we had $500 of equipment maintenance costs. So that's where that goes. So we come back up and continue going down. So now we have the juror per diem. So again, this is broken out with a $15 for the first 3 days and then $30 for any day after that. And so it's the total amount. So let's say for the $15, we had 200 of those days, 3,000. Then for the 30 days, we had 100 of those. So it's also 3,000. And then we had $1,000 of other. So again, you would come down, since it is an other, you would come down here and specify in this column, row 48, what it was. Then for grand jury, same thing. We had $200 worth of the $15 a day. And the neat thing about this form is, so let's say we try to submit the next one as 3004. It gives us an error because that's not a multiple of 30. So that can't be our payment. So we correct it. We had $3,000 there again, $1,000 worth of other. And again, this is the last other line. We would come down to row 48 and identify what those charges were. And then we come to meals and lodging. So let's say we had $5,000 worth of meals, and an improvement from the previous form is it used to have to say breakfast, lunch, dinner, other, and now we've just rolled that up into meals. So we had $5,000 worth of meals, we had $1,000 worth of lodging, and that gets us to line 37, which is our total expenditures that we had for this quarter. So we had $52,000. Now, when we come down to the actual line on line 40, it take the $52,000, it took that and it included what we had, the $5,000 on hand from the previous fiscal year, that's the carry forward funding. So it says that we only need $47,000 dispersed from JAC. And again, the main line where we identify that is 42K. So that shows us when you submit this form, okay, we will need $47,000 of actuals dispersed from JAC. So this form would be complete, and this is what you would send in for quarter one. So quarter two should be a lot easier because we don't have to figure out what we have rolled over from the previous fiscal year. So let's fill out quarter two. So again, the form would be blank. You would fill in your contact information. We would identify October through December. And again, this is the first version of quarter two that we're sending in. Now all of our actual expenditures from October through December will be identified here in column H. But before we fill in any of our actuals, the one thing we will come back and do in column G is, let's say after you submitted this, we sent it to JAC, they dispersed us everything, 100% of what we requested. So that means that they dispersed us $47,000. So we'll come back in here for quarter one and identify that, yes, they did give us $47,000. We confirm that. And now it gives it to us to column K42. It calculates that as 0. So we are all caught up. So JAC does not owe us any funding as of quarter one. We're caught up, we're made whole, and now we can enter our actuals again. So is that pretty clear on the form? Does anyone have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
We need it recorded, sorry.
No, so it would be what you have on your books. But again, a likely place where going through it this past quarter, where a lot of it did come from, was counties that were caught up from 2 years ago, but coming into last state fiscal year, again, which was still on the estimate model. So, you know, again, they said that, hey, we plan on spending $100,000, but we only ended up spending, for whatever reason, the pandemic, we only spent 80,000, but we were dispersed 100. So we have that $20,000 delta in our account. So that's what we have to carry forward. That's where most of it that we've, from talking to a lot of counties, that's where most of it's come from. But hopefully next year, since we are probably going to be reimbursed 100% of our actuals, everyone should be caught up going into next fiscal year. So, you know, that will probably be zero. We may not even need that to include that if we're able to be 100% caught up going into that following fiscal year. All right, any other questions on jury? Mr. Dew.
Good morning, everybody. Jury been a real mess for several years. Due to request to member here. But the JC was released 25%, and it wasn't enough. So for the institute of sports, the good news is we have a lot of less problems. Problems are picking up. How this all works. One of the questions I have to put you on the spot, Griffin, but up on the right-hand column, we have an amount for your jury budget. You remember over the years when you had that jury budget amount, that was your approved budget, and if you extend beyond that, we have enough money now. And that's my question to you. Let's say Union County gets whatever $30,000 and they spend $35,000. You know, do they have to take out of the CCOC side?
That is a great question. So we would look at it rolled up. Everyone, so some counties would be above their quarterly, you know, if you took that as an estimate, some counties would be above, some counties would be below, but we would look at everything total and then compare it to what we have released. So this year we have 3.5 million per quarter. So as long as it stays total 3.5 million or less, even if you're $100,000 over your, you know, what your estimate, your past 3-year history is, as long as, you know, 67 counties, we're under the total threshold, you would get reimbursed 100% of that. And this year, that likely will not be a problem because we have the 3.5% due to the great work of the legislative committee. And also with the rollover that we had, which was pretty substantial, that really drove down Q1 actuals. But to your question, in out years, if we get caught up and we don't have anything from previous years to roll over, we just have the 11.7 million and we spent over that in a quarter, we would likely just take the total that we spent down and prorate everyone down to that total.
And if you remember, the last couple of budget committee has brought it forward and adjusted everyone's budget authority for jury to match the actual dollars that they received. So provided we have the funding available, that would probably most likely be the process of going forward. But to Griffin's point, should it be a year that we don't have the additional?
On the issue of having enough dollars, if we are extracting costs, we're looking at costs and through the legislative process. 11.7 wasn't enough a couple of years ago, so it's probably not going to be enough, you know, year or two from now. We'll try to get additional dollars. They're from the legislature, but we need that information. Also, if an individual clerk sends in their request for reimbursement and you see in our office, can their boss really explain that or not? Would be calling them to say this seems to be a higher number than usual?
Great question. So at the bottom of the form, there is another below the other explanation. There's additional information. So if there's anything like that scenario or anything big that you think, hey, you know, the CCOC should know that this is what's going on, this is where you can put it by quarter. So great question.
Stating correctly. So what is a clerk? Quarterly budget, would it be reimbursed through the quarterly budget?
So it depends on what quarter it happens in. So a lot of times if there's like this year, there will be extra carryover going into quarter two and likely quarters three, quarters four. And also as a note, the budget committee does look at if we know some of these cases are coming up, they're huge cases or a murder trial. They have pulled out some of these where, you know, we would track it on here, but we do know that, okay, there's something going on in Orange County. So, you know, we have looked at that ahead of time. But if it's a scenario where it's, you know, unexpected, we didn't know about it, it pops up in that fiscal year. You know, again, the same thoughts would apply where as long as we stay, you know, total under the, you know, at that point in the year under what is released, we're good. So, you know, I guess that's kind of the ebb and flow is some counties that's happening in this fiscal year, but other counties might be a little bit slower. So as long as it kind of evens out under the total.
Just to add to that a little bit, if you don't get the amount in one quarter, and so let's say we're at the 2.7, 2.9 during a regular year. So if you submit a reimbursement and it has to be prorated down, let's say we got 3 instead of 2.9, there is likely not going to be you're likely not going to be able to get that in the next quarter. And so that is where the amount that you're going to have to pull out, whatever you didn't get in reimbursed that quarter, you're going to have to set aside some of your CCOC dollars to pay for that, because the likelihood is that you're not going to get it in the next quarter either. So.
But the budget forms are not set up to where you have to spend a quarter of your money in a quarter, because it doesn't look, from a CCOC standpoint, you're just looking at 3.5. As long as we're in 3.5, you can spend whatever you want.
Right.
Whatever your actual are. They don't have to be exactly.
Right.
And you'll. Yeah,
Exactly. Any other questions on jury or pandemic? Any questions on the budget as a whole, CCOC budget? Revenue? Budget's the most exciting part of your day. Of course. Sure. Hopefully. For this year. Okay, so no budget questions, no revenue questions, no jury, pandemic recovery, December 31st. All right, we got it. Okay, sure. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, we are going to take a break. So if you need to stretch your legs, use the restroom, grab a water, and we will start back for the next session at 9 a.m.